Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the 3 out of 4 Ain't Bad episode. I'm John Bonus, which is daily with me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Yeah, 3 out of 4. The 4-game series are weird because it's like we talk a lot about how, not just with the Twins, but with the Twins in general, if you just win series,
Right.
you will make the playoffs. You will have successful runs.
You'll win the division, probably.
You'll win the division.
Right, yeah. Right.
And, you know, the Twins have been doing that. They lost several series at the beginning of the year, obviously, and starting 7-13. But, I mean, they've won the vast majority of their series since then. But most of those are 3-game series where there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. Then you toss in some of these 4-game series, and it's like, all right, well, that complicates a little because, you know, is splitting 2 out of 4 a successful series or not? It depends on the opponent, whether it's home road. But taking 3 out of 4, even they're at home, but taking 3 out of 4 from the team directly in front of you in the standings.
Right.
And, by the way, the Royals had won 8 out of 9 and 13 out of 17 coming into this thing.
Yes, right.
I mean, they're on pace for 100-something. They're the darlings of the American League in terms of beating expectations.
Right.
And I'm not saying the Twins destroyed them or anything. A couple of the games got a little closer than.
Well, I think the Royals outscored the Twins on the series, right?
Yeah, I guess that's possible. But it was a good series. Rocco Baldelli post game after yesterday, after the third win, was as like enthusiastic as I've seen him after a midseason random win.
Sure.
And because some of the questions were like, oh, that almost got away from you there.
Right, yeah.
And he was like, listen, that was a real fun game. This has been a real fun series.
A 4-run comeback.
Yes. But I think his thing was
pretty encouraging.
I had to pull some strings in that game.
Yeah.
I had to, Kepler coming off the bench with that hit kind of, and also he left in Margot to bat for himself.
Yes, he did.
He draws the walk. Then Correa comes through with the bases clearing 3-run triple. Yep. And these were all, I think he was kind of feeling good with some of his decisions.
That's right.
But then beyond that, this has been such a up and down. There hasn't been a stretch of this season that has not been a streak.
You're right.
They start 7-13, then they go 17-3, then they lose 7 in a row, and now they've won 7 out of 8,
something like that,
6 out of 7, whatever it is.
Yep.
And it's just such a strange way to be. Yeah. And I don't know. We talked, I think, a couple episodes ago. It becomes hard to, determine what you think of this team, like big picture. Because you look at the record and it's like, all right, right now they're on pace for exactly 90 wins. But they've never played like a 90-win team. I know we say this every week, but it hasn't ended.
Yeah.
And so for Baldelli, I think he was asked pregame yesterday, what is your, like, at the 1/3 mark of the season roughly, what would you kind of say you're putting your stamp on for this team that you've been excited by or impressed by or whatever? And he thought about it and he said basically our ability, and we've talked about this endlessly over the years with him, our ability to get off the mat, to never be too down.
Right. You're right.
To say, we've lost 7 in a row. Can you believe that? Right. Well, let's just go win 7 out of 9 or whatever, and let's just make up for that. And they've done that. Now, as I like to say,
they've done it twice.
It'd be great if you weren't on the mat constantly.
If they could just avoid the 7-13 or the 7-game losing streak.
Maybe that's asking a little bit too much. So I really was struck by. I mean, he's in a good mood when they win. Obviously, everyone is. The clubhouse music's playing and everything like that. But I really thought going back to the first loss or the loss in Washington, that was the 7th straight loss, like a week and a half ago or whatever it was. They had the closed door players only meeting, and then I guess he also gave I don't know if it was that day or the next day, basically a kind of not kind of come to Jesus speech. He doesn't really give those, but a speech. And it was basically like, we got to get our S together here. Like we can't do, like, we got to turn it around. And so I think from his standpoint, the vibe I got off him yesterday after taking 3 out of 4 from a good Royals team. So he seemed, I think, like legitimately kind of proud that like, this is what I told him we needed to do. Right. This is what I want him to do. And against a good and also hot opponent.
Yep.
They did some really good things here. They weren't necessarily easy wins, but I feel like they
weren't dominant, but they
right. And so
that's even better to come back. One of them was a big comeback.
Well, and that was one of the points he, I think, made in his little speech to the team whenever that happened a week ago. Was we teams fall behind. You fall behind 3-4 runs early in games. You can't be down 4-1 in the second inning and just go, oh well, I guess we'll come back tomorrow and try to win. You got to fight and try to win some of these. And so whether it was the Kirilloff 3-run homer a little bit ago or whether it was a couple of these Royals games where they pounced on some errors by the Royals or a ball off the glove or they didn't consider the game lost because they were down multiple runs in the third or fourth or fifth inning or whatever. And I think that was something he was specifically pointed to. And, it must feel good to be like, guys, we got to get it together. Here's a couple specific things we got to start doing. We got a good opponent coming in here for 4 games. We're going to see the whole thing, basically. They're going to see most of our rotation, most of our bullpen. We're going to see lefties. We're going to see righties. And you come out and you win 3 out of 4. Now, because baseball is unrelenting, now they head to Houston for a rematch of the ALDS. Now, I will say the Astros are not good this season, but
they were better lately.
Still scare the S out of me. Right. I don't know why I'm saying S all the time on this show, but it is the free show. I would just say it on the Patreon. I'm sorry. And then after that, they go to Yankee Stadium. Right. Now, the Yankees I think, have the best record in the American League, or maybe second to Cleveland. So this certainly would have been, coming into the season, one of those chunks of the schedule that you point to and go, oh boy, that could be an ugly week. Sure. And I'm not saying that's not the case. But the Twins are playing well. They just beat a 100-win pace team that I think is still 3 games up on them in the Royals.
The series before that, they beat the defending world champions.
Right. Who, similar to the Astros, aren't playing that well this season. Yep. But you look at the lineup and you go, well, I still don't want to face them, really. I mean, we saw this with the Astros in the playoffs in 2020.
Right.
They finished below 500 and got into the playoffs because it was a short season and division stuff was weird. Yeah. And our point was like, the Twins should be favored if you're going off that season. But also, do you want to face Altuve and Bregman and whoever, Correa at the time, and Alvarez and all these guys? And so the pitching has been the problem for the Astros because they've just had an incredible number of injuries. They've also just lost pitchers and had some guys age out. Correct. But that we saw in October how scary that lineup can be. I don't care what the numbers are. I mean, I could be 65 years old and Yordan Alvarez is 50 years old, and you tell me he's playing some softball game somewhere, and I go, let's pitch around him a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's certain guys. Bregman has had a terrible season. Well, I don't want to face him with 2 guys on base still. I mean, like, until proven otherwise, with a team like the Astros who have done so much as this core and have been so scary and have beaten the Twins twice now in playoff series that we've seen, I mean, going there is still a real test, and then going there and then going to Yankee Stadium is a real test. And then, by the way,
all on the road too.
They have a third. It's a 3-city home or a road trip.
That's right.
They face the Pirates, who are not good, except the Pirates have Skeens and Jones are 2 of the best young starting pitchers you'll ever see. I don't know how it matches up yet in terms of the schedule, but because that's 8 games away or whatever. But this would be a real test. I mean, I think the Royals were a test. Obviously, 2 road series against teams that I would expect still to be in the playoffs. Certainly, the Astros. I mean, their odds have lowered, but they're still scary. So I mean, I think that's big. This should be a very interesting week. And on top of that, I believe Royce Lewis will be in the line, barring a setback with his quadriceps rehab. I believe Royce Lewis will be in the lineup for Game 1 at Yankee Stadium. That will be his return. That's talking to people the past couple of days and reading between the lines, and also just kind of trying to fill in the blanks here. I don't think he'll return versus the Astros this weekend, because I think they're going to want him to play a little bit more third base than he's played so far.
He's played twice so far for the Saints
on the rehab,
base,
But and Monday is an off day for the Saints, so that is kind of a clean breaking point, I think, where you play probably 2 times over the weekend, maybe play back-to-back games there, you play some third base, you run around a little bit, hopefully get a few more hits or whatever, but I don't think they really care about that, and then join them at Yankee Stadium. It is a very funny place to return to. It's
Yes.
like, here, return to the most famous place against the most famous opponent and the site of the worst memories in Twins history.
You can ask Louis Ireland about that, by the way.
True. He did all right.
Yeah, he did all right.
But meanwhile, knowing Royce Lewis, he'll probably home run the first pitch he sees or something like that. That it definitely is a thing that Baldelli and other Twins folks have fully bought into with Royce.
Right.
The idea that
It's just unreal.
offensively, at least, because I don't think they. I mean, he's had 3 or 4 hits on the rehab. He's been fine.
3 out of 15 so far.
Yeah, but I don't think they really care about that.
Right.
In terms of his readiness, I think the bat is the last thing they care about for his readiness. And that's true of a lot of guys coming back from injury, but they want him to be running okay, to be fielding, to just sort of being able to play 2 out of 3 back to back. That's like wake up the next morning after playing back to back and not be injured again. And there's something, I mean, he's done it, but they also just sort of believe like once he's in the batter's box in a game that matters and he is healthy, he'll hit. Right. So I think that's part of the equation too. That I really do think they've mapped out this whole thing kind of in advance, barring any setbacks or anything. He'll return at Yankee Stadium. At which point they're going to have to make a roster move,
right.
And they're also going to have to make a lineup move.
Yes,
and so we're going to talk about that because I've tried to do as much kind of digging around on this as I can, and I'm not Woodward and Bernstein or anything, but. My sense is they truly don't know yet.
I feel the same way. Let's break that down because I also spent way too much time thinking about this and talking to people about it, and I have no clue. So instead, let's talk about a couple of sponsors, and then we'll get back to it. Give you all a couple minutes to think about it yourselves a little bit. I'm going to start with Z-Biotics. Yesterday, I went to the Twins game. Then I knew I was going to be going to the Wolves game. I was going to be having a couple beers at both, and we had already decided.
What?
And I know we already decided that we were going to be podcasting at 8 a.m. here.
Yeah.
And I needed to be, top of my game, as I always am a Friday morning at 8 a.m.
Sure, yeah. What?
So before we went out, I just had a Z-Biotic. Z-Biotic is, and I feel, how did I do this morning, Aaron, as we talked for the first hour before?
By your standards? Excellent. Excellent. Exactly. Top of your game. You know what? Top of your game.
Exactly. Thank you. Listen, Z-Biotic is just a probiotic, right? It's a probiotic that you take before you go out drinking. It helps process the chemicals that can end up leading to you not feeling so good in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? And as such, so it's
if you're on vacation, you're going to a birthday party, you're going to, let's say, 2 sporting events, or you're just, Wednesday night in the John Bonus realm universe.
That's right.
You pop one of these in.
I have used it. Chrissy has used them. We've got really good results so far in the handful of times that we've used it. So I can absolutely personally recommend it to you.
You can get 15% off if you want to give Z-Biotics a try. It's just Z, like the letter Z, biotics.com/Gleeman. You get 15% off your first order, and that's when you use Gleeman at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So head to zbiotics.com/Gleeman. Use the code Gleeman at checkout, and you get 15% off. Thank you to Z-Biotics for sponsoring this episode and John's entire existence.
And now we've got a new one. Dan Hodgen is a real estate consultant for here in the Twin Cities. And he's helped sell over 500 homes with 5-star service since 2001. So he does everything that you would want a real estate consultant to do.
Search for properties. He can kind of get you market value ideas for your property or the properties you're looking for. He can negotiate the actual the sales, the purchases, whatever you need. He can be kind of your point person for whatever you have.
And here's where he's a little bit unique. He lists properties for just a $6,000 flat fee. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the industry right now about what people can charge and not charge in real estate things.
Changing.
There's absolutely
rules changing.
That is correct. So he just says a traditional commission structure would charge 3.3% to list it. That's for $400,000 properties. If you only charge $6,000, you're saving $6,200 bucks.
Like half price from the seller's standpoint.
Right. And he also doesn't charge a broker admin commission to buyers or sellers. That can save you another $500,000 bucks. Bottom line is he does effective work and at a high level, does everything you need him to do, and for $6,000.
Yes, having bought and sold more properties than I would like over the last 5 to 10 years, I can tell you how much difference it makes to have someone involved who actually knows what they're doing, but also is not just pushing a commission element on you.
Right, that's right.
And so I think that really helps someone who's super experienced. I've worked with experienced people, not experienced, and it makes a big difference.
Right,
so you can go to twins6k.com.
Yeah, he's created a special link just for our listeners.
Yes, because it's $6,000 flat fee instead of the commission.
Twins 6K for $6,000.
So twins and the number 6 and then the letter K. So twins6k.com.
You can search listings. You can find out how much your home is worth, all this other stuff there. That's twins6k.com. So check out Dan at twins6k.com. That's twins, as in your favorite team, and 6k, as in his flatfee.com. That's twins6k.com, helping you from start to finish. And now, here's my favorite part about this. Yeah. He also got a jingle for this by Stuart Rose,
our favorite,
who does some of our jingles
jingle
for our
master
Patreon.
himself.
And here is the jingle.
Call Dan Hodgin, he's your man. He'll sell your lodging for just $6,000. From western Wisconsin to the Twin Cities land. At twin6k.com, find Double N Dan. He'll give you his all for just $6K. To find your dream home or sell yours today. Use your noggin, find Dan Hodgin at twin6k.com.
All right. How'd you like it?
I fear we have too many production elements to this show, by which I mean one. It's too many. I fear for
I love it.
John's editing skills. Yeah. Okay.
Let's get back to the Twins, not Twins 6K.
We should mention, by the way, there's a commercial-free version of this show that is available on Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. And we just did an episode a couple days ago with special guest Do-Hyung Park, the Twins beat writer for MLB.com, one of my favorite people personally, but also I think one of the best in the business as a beat writer and just a super interesting
and apparently
guy.
One of the best in the business as a special podcast guest because we got no end.
The reaction
of
was
great
so
comments.
good.
Yes,
I sit next to Do in the press box every game, and over the last couple games since we did the episode, more than 10 people came up to him and said, "That was a great episode, Do." And 2 of those people asked to see his spreadsheet. And you might think, is that a euphemism for something? No, it's not. If you listen to the Patreon, you'll know what we're talking about. Do, can I see your spreadsheet?
He even did his Edward Julian impression.
Yeah, which is really worth the price of admission. Right. So patreon.com/Gleeman. And we're lining up some more guests here. Now that we're kind of in full swing of the season, I think we're gonna have some of the regulars,
including we'll be dropping one on Monday that talks about the Houston Astros series. Every Monday morning we drop one that talks about the weekend series, and then often on Wednesday we'll do a mailbag. So
Patreon.com/Gleeman. Okay, so back to the Royce Lewis situation. Obviously, it's a great thing to have him back. He is arguably their best player. He's certainly one of their most dynamic players and just sort of a guy who boosts everything around him in a way on and off the field, I would say. They've done a fairly good job, I would say, filling in for him at third base. I mean, Miranda has hit over the last month or so.
Amazing.
Before that, Willie Castro did some nice things. I mean, the overall production in what has been essentially the entire season. I mean, he played the first, 2.5 innings or 2 innings opening day. Yeah. So they've played like 56 games without him, basically. I think they've done remarkably well, all things considered. I mean, when you lose your number 3 hitter and your starting third baseman immediately.
Yes, right. Well, on top of that, they also throughout that had injuries to all of everybody else too. Kepler was out for a couple weeks. Correa was out for a couple weeks. Buxton was out for a couple weeks.
But Miranda has really offensively kind of saved their butts a little bit here, filling in for him, and he's been fine at third. I mean, I think if you've watched him over the last 4 or 5 weeks at third, playing pretty regularly, I think you can probably see why they don't want to play him at third regularly. But I think you can also see, to his credit, that if you are forced into a situation where you are playing him regularly at third, it's not disastrous by any means. There's just certain plays he does not have the physical tools to make. And even when it's Castro or Farmer or Royce Lewis or whoever it is, they just have
He's not the most nimble.
Right. But I think given his limitations, I think he's done a solid job, and he's certainly hit well.
Yes.
I mean, he's come through with some clutch moments. He's hit, I think he's got a 118, 120 OPS plus overall this season.
Yeah.
And so considering where he was at this time last year with the shoulder injury, and it basically turned into a lost season for him on both sides of the ball, he looks just like he did as a rookie in 22, which is to say pretty impressive and encouraging. So that plays into this, because if he's been the fill-in third baseman for the past month or so at least, and let's say he weren't hitting well, or he was looking even worse defensively, well, it would be supernatural then to supernatural, like very natural, not like Superman,
not like Charmed.
No, that was a show, right?
Yes.
With who was in that?
I don't know.
The daughter from Who's the Boss?
Okay,
sure. I get sidetracked easily. You can't do that, John. You mentioned a '90s show to me, and I'm like, Alyssa Milano is her name.
Okay, yes.
May or may not have been a real big fan of her when I was a kid.
I bet you were.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of guys who weren't.
But that's true. Yeah, take a number is what you're saying. Join a club. Anyway, if he hadn't been playing that well, it would be very natural to welcome Lewis back and just say, all right.
Doherty too, right?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying I wasn't a fan of, but, okay. Yeah, who?
There are three of them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What if we just turn this into that was just the
into
show
the Charmed
now.
podcast?
Yeah. This, by the way, is
we got a bunch of people screaming.
I know, that's
the names of all the people.
They are sitting at a computer or a phone, and they
Chris Hockey is among them. He has that on every morning.
Charmed?
Yeah.
Why is it?
It's on like
TNT
TNT or something like that.
It's a repeat.
And so he would just have that in the background just to look at the eye candy. Yeah.
Okay.
To keep him awake in the morning.
I'm a fan of their acting. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I'm not a pervert like Chris Hockey. Royce Lewis. But they're not going to send down Miranda.
Right.
No, as sort of seamless as that would be, you bring back your starting third baseman, you send down the guy who, by the way, Miranda began the season in the minors. He wasn't on the opening day roster. That would be so easy, except Miranda has, to his credit, hit and played his way out of that picture.
Right.
Or into the picture full time. And also, I think defensively, I don't know if they want to play him a ton at first base, because actually he, a couple years ago, looked worse at first than he did at third, but maybe he's...
But he also hadn't played a lot at first
He may
base.
have improved. But certainly as a DH, they haven't gotten, other than Jeffers, who can catch, they haven't gotten amazing production from first base or DH. And so if you're saying, well, okay, where's Miranda going to play? It's one thing to say you're going to keep him on the roster, but you have to find him consistent at bats. Well, you're always going to be able to find him every day at bats against left-handed pitching, because he's a right-handed hitter, and you're benching guys like Larnach or Kirilloff, et cetera, against lefties. Right. So the question really is, can you find him some at bats against right-handed pitching to make him more than just a platoon player? And I would argue you absolutely can do that.
Yes.
At first base, DH, and if we're being honest, Royce Lewis is not going to play 100% of the games at third base,
especially not at the beginning.
Nor should
for
he.
the first week, right?
And so whether it's Royce taking an actual day off or sliding to DH to take kind of a partial day off, get him off his legs a little bit more, you can plug Miranda back in at third base once or twice a week. Yep. You give him some at bats at DH. You give him maybe a start or two here or there at first base. I think there's enough of a role for him as long as he's hitting. And in fact, Baldelli said that. He was asked about Miranda post game yesterday and said, "Look, we're not in a position where we're getting rid of guys who are hitting."
Right. Yeah. Right.
And he's hitting. Right. And he hit 2 years ago, and he hit this year. And the only time really he hasn't hit for us was when he was clearly injured.
I think one of the things we talked about on Monday's Patreon, we were breaking down one of the plays over the weekend where, Kirilloff was on first base. Miranda was 1 out. Miranda was up there with a full count, and the question was, Kirilloff going to try and they going to send the runner? Do they trust Miranda enough to make contact on this player, or do they risk the strikeout, throw out, double play? And they did absolutely trust Miranda with that. It shows a level of comfort with him and his free swinging ways, which can work both for and against you in that situation.
He puts the ball in play.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. But he also puts the ball in play, right?
So then, so Lewis is back, let's say, for the Yankee series. Miranda stays. Well, who goes? I don't think they're going to cut from 13 to 12 pitchers.
Yep.
In part because we've just so rarely seen them do that over the last couple of years, but also they're going out on a road trip facing the Astros and the Yankees lineups,
right,
and they're playing like 13 games in 14 days or something. It's not really a spot where you're like, we probably can ditch an arm here.
Sure.
They're going to need their bullpen. They're going to need all that.
Right.
So who does go? Well, I honestly think there's legitimately 5 candidates, which is remarkable considering.
Are you including Miranda in one of those 5?
No.
Okay.
Other than Miranda.
Okay. Other than the obvious one, right?
Now, if Miranda goes, 0 with 10 strikeouts in this series against Houston, maybe that changes. But I feel pretty confident that he's not going to be the one sent down. But I think there's legitimately 5 guys who could be sent down, which is amazing when there's 13 total position players. We've ruled out Miranda. Right. They're not sending down Correa. They're not sending down Buxton. There's guys who are just
This is one of those situations where the fact that Willie Castro can play just about any place and ends up moving around and handling a bunch of stuff means that you can have a lot of roster flexibility when it comes to what you're going to do when you replace your third baseman. So
I wanted to, here's a quote from, this is out of context, but from Baltelli yesterday, it was really funny. He said, when you, we were asking him about the in-game moves, basically.
Right.
And let's see. Here, like choosing Kepler as the pinch hitter over Julian because they clearly wanted more contact and he has a better chance of hitting a single.
Sure, that's right.
Then you had to alter the lineup or the defensive alignment a little bit. Castro had to come in and play second base. Here's what Baldelli said. I love this out of context, but that was the context. He said, listen, when you have Willie Castro, you can do pretty much anything you want.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was like, that's a real motto. I'm sure hopefully his wife thinks that. But yeah, I mean, it's because, and overall, even beyond Castro, Farmer hasn't played well, but Farmer gives you flexibility. Margot hasn't played well. There are guys, they rarely have guys who only play one position who aren't, the stars play one position. But the backups and the role players and stuff, even we're talking about Miranda. Yeah. We're saying he's been at third, now he's going to go to first DH. And so they do have an overall level of flexibility that allows them to just choose and be able to kind of fill in the blanks regardless of who's being removed from the puzzle.
Right.
But that also, in a weird way, makes it even trickier because there isn't an obvious we can't send this guy down because then who will play here? Well, you can send down whoever you want in this situation and guys can cover the position. So here are the 5. And I'm not saying these all have a 20% chance of being the one sent down.
Yes, I agree.
I'm just saying there is some...
We're going to talk through the pros and cons of each of these 5.
There's some reality in which one of these 5 people...
It depends on which way the Twins want to fall on this.
Right. So... I'll put Larnach and Kirilloff are very similar stylistically, obviously. Left-handed hitting corner, first base, DH, left field, right field, very similar. Larnach has outproduced him overall. Kirilloff is the one who started the season on the opening day roster, however, and has a better track record just in general.
Yeah. Kirilloff had a longer slump than Larnach had, but both of them seem to be kind of coming out of it over the last week or hitting the ball a little harder the last
got
week.
4 hits in a month, but they all happen to be homers. Well, that helps. But yeah, Larnach hit a good 3-run homer a few days ago.
Kirilloff hit 2 of them.
Right. I'm just saying he's hitting 110 in his last 40 games or something. So those would be... you remove a left-handed kind of corner bat, non-fielding asset, certainly, in both cases. Larnach's dealing with a foot injury, too, so that hasn't really helped. Well, okay, who then takes on that role? Well, part of that role would be filled by Miranda. Now, he's not left-handed, but if you remove, let's say, Kirilloff, those are DH first base at-bats that can just go directly to Miranda a lot of the time. Not quite the same with Larnach because he plays a little outfield, but Larnach has been mostly a DH because of his foot or his toe, I guess is the injury, turf toe. But even left field, Willie Castro can play left field.
Yeah, if
you send down Larnach and keep Kirilloff can play left field, and then Miranda can play DH. Right. So there's enough.
The thing is right now versus right-handed pitchers. Right. If you're going to have both Kirilloff and Larnach in there. Well, one's going to be that DH and one's going to be left field because you're probably not losing Santana, right? And then if that happens, well, where's Willie Castro, right? Willie Castro he's not playing third base anymore because Royce Lewis is there. He's not playing center field. Buxton's there. He's not playing second base because Julian's there, right? And so
once a week, maybe.
No, right? You can do all that stuff, but the point is if you get to the point where you're like, okay, so also I don't have any room for Miranda in that. If he's going to get some at-bats versus right-handed. The 2 guys, generally, roster decisions can often be made based on, who's going to lose the at-bats? somebody's going to lose the at-bats. And I think when you break this down, the two guys most likely to lose at-bats because of this are going to be either Kirilloff or Larnach. There's not going to be quite as much at-bats as you want for them. You can do a lot of little things. You can play we'll play 3 out of 4 guys on a regular basis, and kind of move things around and get Santana some rest.
You're saying if you want to continue playing Castro regularly.
That's right.
Which I think he's been better than those two guys. That's right. Generally over the last 2 years. Right. So, so you have those two. Both of them have minor league options remaining. Larnach began the season at AAA.
Right.
But also Larnach's, he's got 750 OPS or something. He's been fine.
Yeah.
And Kirilloff's got an average-ish OPS and has had some good moments, obviously. Right. You mentioned Julian. I'll include him here.
Yep. He's one of the 5.
And that speaks to how poorly he's performed offensively. He's had a couple good moments during the Royals series offensively.
Right. Yep. But he also feels like he's coming out of a little bit of his funk right now. Yep.
Now, the issue with Julian is that he's not a guy who's been up and down. He's a guy who, came up and filled in, went back to the minors early last year. But since the middle of last year, he's not only been in the majors, but he's been batting leadoff, batting second. Yes. He's been a prominent player and one of their better players for a lot of that time. So then you're like, okay,
but not lately.
We can send him down, but what kind of, is that sending a message, or is that kind of overly harsh on a guy who has been a big part and still projects as a big part of this team? But here's the other thing I'll say about Julian. He's become a legitimately average or possibly above average defensive second baseman.
Yeah, he's been good.
I mean, I agree. He's made a bunch of very good plays at second base.
That used to be a mark against him. It's no longer a mark against him.
And so that's part of the Larnach-Kirilloff equation, is like neither of those guys are an asset defensively. Right. Anybody who replaces them, they're either playing DH where the glove is not an issue at all, so Miranda can play there, or if you're taking them out of left field and you're putting Willie Castro there, you've upgraded the defense significantly. Well, I don't think you're going to really significantly upgrade the second base defense. I mean, if you were to send down Julian, who's hitting 200 and he hasn't been good for a month or so, well, it's probably going to be a lot of Willie Castro at second base, which is fine. Willie Castro can certainly play second base. He just hasn't had the need to do that for the Twins. But he's done. I think 2-3 years ago for the Tigers, he did it. I mean, he can play shortstop. He can play second base. He's played everywhere. But I don't think Willie Castro is going to be significantly better than Julian at second base.
It feels like a push.
And I don't even think Farmer at this point is significantly better than Julian at second base. And if you'll notice, Farmer has been coming in for Miranda defensively over the last several weeks, not Julian. And in fact, yesterday, they made multiple moves.
I mean, that makes a little bit of sense.
To get Farmer at third base and then brought in Julian to play second, which tells you they think Julian is much better than Miranda, which I agree with. But that was not the case
No, you're right.
last year at this time, or even coming into the season necessarily. So I think Miranda or Julian would be a worse, like a bigger, I don't want to say commitment's the wrong word, but a kind of bigger decision. Like sending down Larnach, I'm not saying he deserves to be sent down, but they've done this with him multiple times. Now, he'd be frustrated by that because he's hitting pretty well. But it's not meaningful in any sense because they've done it 4 times already. And even with Kirilloff, maybe that would have some meaning because he hasn't really been demoted straight up. It's been more he gets hurt, he has to rehab in the minors. With Julian, this would just be a straight up demotion for a guy who was your opening day second baseman and has been hitting leadoff and has been, for the most part, one of your better players since the middle of last year. So you could do that. And again, Willie Castro allows you to do anything. Willie Castro and Farmer can just platoon if they want at second base. You're not losing a ton defensively. If anything, defensively, you would hope to have one or both of them perform better than Julian has offensively. But I think their bigger hope is that Julian snaps out of it offensively and goes back to being an impact hitter.
Right.
I mean, I think that to me now is he.
I think that's the hope with Kirilloff and Larnach, though, too. I agree with you that Julian was certainly more part of their plans coming into this season. There's no question
Julian
about that,
has more recently I mean, Julian had success last year that neither Larnach nor Kirilloff has ever had.
You're right.
And also, he's younger than them, and he's less experienced than them, so there's less track record of him not performing. I mean, it's basically just been a month. I'm not saying he's been bad over the course of this. So, but the question with him, I would want to answer if I were the Twins, is do you feel strongly that sending him to AAA would actually help him get back on track?
Right.
Because with Julian, I don't want it to be punitive because I think you want Julian long term. And so the question is, like, can he bounce out of this or bounce back from this or get out of this and get back on track more feasibly or more easily in the majors, just letting him sink or swim versus sending him to the minors? Yeah. Now, if you think he needs a shock to the system and needs to be sent down and all that, but I also don't think he's as I don't know, duplicative, is that a word?
Redundant.
There's
sure.
a word. As those other guys.
I agree.
Because he does play solid defense now. Yep. He is a guy you hit at the top of the lineup when he's going well, though Larnach has hit at the top of the lineup too. So that's where I kind of view the Julian thing. It wouldn't shock me if they sent him down. I mean, he's basically a second-year player who's been bad for 5 weeks now or whatever. I mean, that's you put yourself at risk.
He has a 489 OPS over the last 28 days.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the third option. The fourth option is probably the one I would choose if asked today. I mean, 3 days from now it might be a little different. Also, multiple people I asked about this from the Twins' perspective said this was going to solve itself. Somebody will get hurt in the next 4 days.
That's right.
Or something will happen in the next 4 days where the decision will be made for us.
But that was something we asked back on Monday too. You know, when we thought maybe Royce would be back by Friday. Right.
So to me, Margot is the easiest to remove because he has the smallest role.
Right.
And there's no future with Margot. With whatever you think of Kirilloff and Larnach, you may have soured on them a little bit. You may think this is kind of their last big chance here or whatever. There's some notion that they could have a future with the Minnesota Twins.
Sure.
Obviously, Julian, there's a lot of notion that he could have a future with the Minnesota Twins. Well, I mean, Margot's future with the Minnesota Twins is maybe 4 more months, if that.
Yep.
So if you look at it and you say, who has kind of the smallest role now, and who do we know has no future role?
Right.
Well, that's Margot. And then you toss in the fact that he's been, I would argue, probably the second worst player on the team this season. Now, he's also had a half dozen hits here over the last few games.
Also seems to be coming out of it over the last
come on now.
And I mean, I'll say this. Taking a look at his role is strictly for when they're facing left-handed pitching, right? That's strictly.
It ought to be. Although probably the best plate appearance of his season was yesterday
versus the
against
right-handed
Stratton, the reliever, when he drew a good walk.
Kept him in for one more, kept him. But he was in the game because he was starting versus a left-handed pitcher, right? And you take a look, and I mean, every time they face a left-handed pitcher, he's playing the complete. He's starting. He's playing.
He's been leading off against them.
Yeah, exactly. He's been leading off.
But he hasn't really hit them.
No,
and. Look, when they acquired him, it was clear they acquired him for that role. We thought it was going to be to play center field, but they very quickly seemed to sour on him as a center fielder, and you can see why. He's much slower than he was even last year, let alone a couple years ago. So if you take the center field component out of the equation, where he's behind Castro, behind Austin Martin, maybe even obviously behind Buxton in center field, well, then he's just a platoon corner outfielder. And the bar for being able to hit left-handed pitching, if you're a right-handed hitting platoon corner outfielder, is a lot higher than Margot has produced this season, but really for his whole career. Right. I mean, he's been an okay hitter against left-handed pitching. A 750 OPS type of guy. Well, that works if you're playing center field and you're playing great defense. It doesn't really work if you're just some random left field. I mean, you can find a random left fielder anywhere you want who hits right-handed and can put up a 700-something OPS against left-handed pitching. So, yes, he's played better of late, and he's gotten a decent amount.
Last 2 weeks, he basically has come out of whatever slump he was in the beginning of the season. So,
so to me, that role is very easily filled by Willie Castro.
Yeah,
against a left-handed pitcher, Royce Lewis is going to be at third base. So Castro, assuming Buxton is healthy, who knows, can just play left field. Right. Castro's a better player than Marty Margot as a left fielder against left-handed pitching, and let alone then against right-handed pitching also. And let's say Buxton does go down. you're not using Manny Margot in center field at that point anyway.
Probably not.
You're using Castro or you're calling back up Austin Martin.
Yes.
And for that matter, even if Buxton is healthy, and let's say Willie Castro gets hurt, or Willie Castro is needed at third base or second base or shortstop again because one of the infielders gets hurt. Well, then you go, I wish we really had Margot to play left field. Just call up Austin Martin. Yep. It's the same skill set with a younger, cheaper guy, like who has more upside just by definition of being younger. And so, to me, if you're looking to not upset the apple cart now and for the future, Margot is just such an easy call there. And I know he's a veteran and he seems to be pretty well liked. He seems like a good dude. He's got experience. They specifically brought him in.
Right.
But if you don't trust him to play center field, which they clearly don't, and even at his best, which he has not been at his best, obviously, this season, but even at his best with like Tampa Bay over the years, it's not like he's demolished left-handed pitching. Right. He's just been sort of okay against left-handed pitching. And so he struggled this year. I think his role is super limited. I think he has no future with the Twins. And that's not like me ripping him. He's just on a one-year deal, basically. They're not going to pick up a $12 million option on him next year. So that to me would be, if you look around and you go, well, we could send down Julian, but how does that affect him long-term? And we could send down Larnach, but he doesn't really deserve to be sent down. And we could send down Kirilloff, but we want Kirilloff to be a part of this thing. Right. Well, just send down Margot. I know that's going to upset Manny Margot, but what else does that really change? And
this organization doesn't love screwing around with depth. I mean, the problem is there is no sending down Manny Margot, right? You are releasing Manny Margot, right? The other three guys we talked about are all going to be sent down. They're still going to be in the organization. They'll be called up at any time. You do this with Margot. Margot's out of the organization.
They almost always,
as is the fifth name you're going to be mentioning too. He's also going to be in that boat.
Maybe I'm saying Correa.
I don't think
you don't know, John.
No, he would also be out of the organization.
Correa.
He would also be out of the organization.
It's my hot take. Maybe not. We talked him into going to Wichita for a while. His wife wants to hang out in Wichita. Yeah. It wasn't enough that he talked to his pageant-winning wife and his two lovely children into living in Minnesota.
That's right.
We're going to send them to Cedar Rapids.
They have the greatest Marvel museum in Wichita. We told them about that.
Oh, boy. I think you would have to tell them that, literally Captain America was in Wichita. That he literally could go meet the characters from whatever. Is that even Marvel, or is that the other one?
Which one are we talking? Captain America is in fact Marvel.
I did it.
That's correct.
Yeah, I have no clue.
That's right. Yeah. Listen, there's not a lot of Wichita, but we have this amazing comic book story in Wichita.
But yeah, you're right. The last guy is also. So, but yeah, we've seen when presented with sort of a coin flip decision of who do we want to send out or get rid of to make room for somebody, they will almost always
hold on to their depth.
The situation where they can keep everyone. Yeah. And so, like you said, if you are demoting Margot off the Major League roster, you're essentially parting ways with him. Whereas if you send down Julian, Larnach, Kirilloff, they just go to St. Paul for a while, and if you need them 3 days later, they can come back up 3 days later. Right. But my point, I guess, with Margot is, so what?
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm not saying that as a criticism of him as a person, and I'm not even saying it's not possible that he gets back on track and goes signs with somebody else and puts up a 725 OPS.
The guy that you were hoping he was going to be, except not playing center field.
Right. All I'm saying is, so just give that job to Austin Martin if it comes to it, or Willie Castro.
Austin Martin, by the way, is killing it in St. Paul.
Yeah, although I will caution, I saw Nick Nelson, who I love, say he's got 10 walks in his life. Well, he drew 5 walks in one game where the Twins scored 18 runs and set the all-time, I think, International League record for walks in a game. So
he's leading the way on it.
Yeah, or they were just handing out walks and he took 5 of them.
Right. But yeah, he's got like a 975 OPS.
Yeah. I mean, just skill set wise, he can do that same job, and I think probably as good or better. So the 5th guy out of 5 is Farmer, and this obviously if you keep Julian as your primary second baseman, and Willie Castro is now freed up, but you've kept Miranda, Larnach, and Kirilloff, and you've kept Margot. Well, then where else is Willie Castro going to play?
Right.
Well, he's going to be the platoon partner for Julian at second base, and maybe start a little at second base also.
Right.
Well, that's Farmer's gig.
Well, that's
and similar to Margot. they love Kyle Farmer. Kyle Farmer is a super likable guy.
Right.
I'll add this to the pile of things he's done that's likable. On the scoreboard yesterday, where they put up like the fun facts for him, the new one for him was Kyle Farmer would like to travel to the future so that he can see how much hair he's lost, so he knows to be prepared, or something like that. And I thought, well, that's a guy who's coming up on 35 years old, starting to think about something.
Kyle, you just need to check out Aaron Gleeman in the clubhouse.
In the press. Yeah, that's right. Maybe he did, and that's what made him think about it.
Right.
He was like, oh, damn, compared to 3 weeks ago, Gleeman's.
Am I going to end up like Phil Miller or Aaron Gleeman?
Phil said to me at lunch the other day, he's so annoying without knowing it. He said to me, Linda, it's his wife, lovely, great person.
We love her.
Linda told me I need to get a haircut. What do you think? I thought, Phil, if I had your hair, I would never get it cut. I'd be like Rapunzel. I would just have like what he has the greatest silver fox hair of all time. And I said, if you do get it cut, can I have some of it? Like to just add, you know how like
that's right, yeah,
children who are like
spray on stuff
having like cancer treatment. There's people will cut their long hair and give them for. I need that from.
You want locks of love?
Yeah, from Phil.
From Phil.
He was
Phil Miller's locks of love.
Yeah, really annoyed me.
That's a good title for this podcast.
That's like a skinny person going, I got to cut down this week. I'm not going to have that extra donut. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there like, what? As I'm chewing on a cookie. Anyway,
stalk a celery.
Oh, God. It really is I need a fat person to join the beat. I really do. It's all these young, skinny people, and then Phil,
fat, bald person. I could help.
Yeah, what are you doing next week? Well, you said it. I didn't. I wasn't thinking that way, but sure. That's why you're a good co-host. Threw yourself under the bus there. Really. Threw yourself down a flight of stairs, as we used to like to talk about. But with Farmer, he's a very popular guy in the clubhouse. He's from like a leadership standpoint. He's taken on a mentorship role with Julian. Those are all components, not in his on-field value, but in their willingness to kind of give up on a guy.
Right. Yes.
And so that is a factor. Whether or not fans think that should be a factor, as we're trying to kind of handicap their thought process, that absolutely is a factor.
Right.
It's also a factor that they owe him $6.3 million, and they willingly chose to bring him back instead of just non-tendering him, which he was surprised by. We were surprised by. Yeah. But similar to Margot, the whole premise of bringing back Farmer at $6.3 million, I thought they weren't going to do that, particularly once they dropped payroll, obviously, was that he was going to be the backup shortstop.
Right.
But as we saw when Correa went down for 2.5 weeks, whatever, in April, he barely played shortstop. It was Castro who was the backup shortstop. Right. And
he ended up playing third base because Castro moved.
Right.
But yes.
They could have used either or there, and they chose to use Castro. And I know people were like, well, why? Well, Castro's younger and he's more athletic. And Farmer has done an okay job over the years playing shortstop. He's been a starting shortstop for the Reds. Yeah, he's been a starting shortstop at times for the Twins. But he's 33 now. He never was the fastest, most athletic guy. His ability to play shortstop in the majors is a credit to sort of his smarts and baseball IQ and kind of maximizing talent. But at some point you lose a step when you already didn't have that many steps from an athleticism standpoint, and then they decide you're not really a shortstop. Well, to be a backup infielder who doesn't play shortstop, that's a tough thing for a $6 million player. Right. And obviously he struggled to a huge extent this season. He's hitting 170 or whatever. And the job that when everyone's healthy, when Lewis is back and Castro's still there and Buxton's playing, the role you would still have for him, similar to Margot playing left field against lefties, is to start at second base against lefties. And they still want to platoon Julian for the most part. But he's hitting like 165 against lefties without any power after a career made of hitting lefties. And maybe you want to stick with that and you want to give him some time to get out of it and get back on track. And I absolutely, again, like with Margot, if you were to cut Kyle Farmer and he were to latch on with another team, and you told me, hey, he signed with another team a couple weeks later, he made it back to the roster, he got 200 at-bats.
And now he's Felix Castro, or not Felix Castro, Willie Castro for another team.
Or just Farmer from last year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is a 700 OPS guy who can play a few. I would not be surprised by that at all. But again, similar to Margot, I think you have guys who can do that role now.
Right.
You have Castro who can do that role in the short term, but also you're going to very soon have Brooks Lee.
Yeah.
You also have guys like Michael Hellman down at AAA, who I'm a fan of. They may not necessarily be trying to push him to the majors, but you have some guys who are where Farmer was. I mean, Michael Hellman is Farmer from 6-7 years ago. Just needs a shot. He can play all the positions. He's a right-handed hitter. And so I think in the short term, Margot and Farmer have these very specific, limited platoon roles. And so if you're just kind of removing a Jenga piece, those are the smallest pieces. Those are the pieces least likely to cause the whole thing to collapse. And then you look at, well, okay, that's short term. What's the future? Well, neither of those guys are going to be on the team next year, honestly.
Right.
I mean, it's not. I'm not trying to like rip them or anything, but they're just not. They're veteran guys on 1-year deals, basically. So to me, if this were April, maybe you send down one of the young guys who are optionable and you can keep everyone involved. But as we near June now, is it June?
Tomorrow, yeah.
We're in June now. They're coming up on the 60-game mark. By the time Lewis returns, it'll be the 60-game mark, basically, I think. Exactly. I don't know that you need to be preserving depth or place the same level of importance in preserving depth. And if we're being honest, that depth, those two depth pieces have not helped you. They've hurt you so far. You have Austin Martin. By the way, Austin Martin can play second base against lefties if you need him to. So that's kind of how I see it. Now, in terms of how they see it, they're always going to lean more on being able to send a guy down and keep everyone. I would say particularly in the case of Farmer, but also to some extent with Margot, they value the veteranness. They value the clubhouse aspect. They value the respect aspect, all that stuff, and that's a factor too. So this is what makes it hard to actually try to predict this.
I agree. First of all, I agree on the 5 guys, right, that you've talked about. The first decision becomes sort of, which group are you going to select from? Are you going to select from the Margot Farmer group, or are you going to select? Because in both, Margot Farmer, you're going to lose that player completely from the year. There's a lot of similarity between Margot and Farmer, and I'll just say
That'd be an interesting name, Margot Farmer.
Margot Farmer.
Like Margot
feels like
Robbie.
feels like a character in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Sure.
Margot Farmer.
Yeah, Margot. I don't know. Sure. Yes, and yes.
I would say if you compare Margot and Farmer on most things, Margot and Farmer are basically kind of exactly the same, except that you're returning an infielder and Farmer's an infielder. Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
If you just do sort of the checkbox. I mean, Farmer hasn't hit quite as well as Margot. He hasn't even come out of the slump over the last 2 weeks quite as well as Farmer. He's more likely to be impacted by the infielder in terms of at bats. Like almost all of that stuff. Although I still lean with Margot being more likely than Farmer to go down because Margot hasn't been here for a year and a half.
I was gonna say,
you know what I mean? It comes down to
I think Farmer's
thing.
recent track record is better. Certainly his sort of place with the Twins, sort of tenure with the Twins.
Right.
He's at a higher level on and off the field. But then I would also say, it's technically correct that you're getting back an infielder. Yeah. So you would be more likely to send down an infielder. But Lewis, the domino effect from Lewis frees up Castro, and I think they would prefer to play Castro in the outfield than in the infield. So it almost turns him into an outfielder
a little bit
at that point. And then if we're treating Austin Martin then as sort of the next in line, they prefer him in the outfield over the infield too. So I think you have more at the ready outfielders maybe. Now, once Brooks Lee comes
back,
a good
point.
Then that changes things too. But also they're not going to call up Brooks Lee to be a platoon player necessarily. Right. So that would maybe require some juggling too. So I don't know. It's
so on that side, it's sort of like I can see where it would definitely. I think Farmer is closer to being in trouble than we think he is on that front, right?
Oh, I don't think he's free and clear by any means.
Because of those 5, I probably would have a week ago said, well, I think Farmer's the safest of the 5, just because of the role, right?
Yeah.
But now I'm not so sure about that. And then, as to which way you go onto which group, whether or not you're going to cut the veteran and lose them completely, or one of the rookies and just have to send them down to AAA. Like on the one hand, I think the at bats are going to come from the rookies or from the younger guys, right? That's who's going to lose the plate appearances as a result of Lewis coming back, and that's almost always a good direction as to which guy you should be sending down. On the other hand, this offense is going to go. We've seen it already. This offense is going to go. Both last year and this year we've seen it, as far as how those guys develop, right? Whether or not Kirilloff is hitting, Larnach is hitting, the weak spots have been at the DH first base, and I don't know that any of them, you said, Julian feels punitive, sending down Julian feels punitive. The point is that it's not a punishment for any of the 3 to be sent down, right? But
It has more lasting effect.
The question is, like, all three of them, it feels like they're fighting their way through. They need to be at the majors and fighting their way through this thing to actually get to the point where they are going to be impactful on the offense.
I mean, sometimes going to AAA can help.
Sometimes, but
yeah, I kind of agree with that. And also, I mean, just like you were saying, I agree that, you know, if you're imagining this lineup clicking in the second half like it did last year, it's not because Kyle Farmer and Manny Margot got back to their usual production.
Right.
I mean, that's not driving really anything. That's just sort of a small piece of against lefties and, you know, filling in. Whereas you certainly can say, oh, man, we're looking ahead 2 months and it's August 1st or whatever, and this lineup is really, you know, clicking great. Well, yeah, probably
it's because
Julian's
Larnach and
back leading off and hitting, and one of the two lefty bats. That I think is part of it too.
Yeah,
I guess I would just lean at this stage, and I'm a believer. They've kind of converted me to the let's make the young guys, like if you in the early like Gardenhire days, I was among the many people who are probably listening to this who always wanted to ditch the underperforming veteran for the young guy.
Right.
And I want to trust young players. I will lean more towards future if it's sort of a coin flip situation. Right. But the Twins have...
You focus more... I would suggest you focus more on the... Or both of us focus more on the long term.
Right. Or just upside generally too.
Yeah.
But the Twins over the last few years, and partly because they've had so many injuries that we've seen it play out both ways, you've seen the good and the bad that can happen from it. They've converted me to someone who does believe in the idea of, yeah, you want to give your young guys a chance. And I mean, Julian is a prime example of a guy who got a chance pretty quickly.
Right.
But you don't want them to be the first in line. You want them to be the second in line. You want to delay that as long as possible, not because they're not ready, but because once you call up the young guys, and if they struggle, well, then who do you go to? But here's what I'll say about that. We're 60 games into this thing.
Right.
Like, I'm no longer as worried. Depth still matters. But by the time you reach the 60-game mark, the difference is, to me, I mean, you literally have played X number of the season, so you don't need as much depth because you've already kind of escaped that element of it a little bit. But more than that, you hope at this point of the season, whether it's Austin Martin, whether it's Brooks Lee coming back from injury, whether it's, you know, whoever in the minors, guys start to get promoted. You get new guys at AAA. You get a couple guys at AAA who are better than you expected to be. Whatever the case, you would hope that compared to opening day on June 1st, there's more prospect or young options that you feel comfortable with elevating, or at least deciding, all right, well, we didn't think Austin Martin was ready on April 1st, but on June 1st or July 1st, let's do it. Like, I mean, this is the time.
I mean,
so I would lean more towards, I would cut Margot, and I would probably lean more towards Farmer than I think the Twins probably would. But I do think it's viable to just look at Kirilloff and Larnach and say they're essentially the same role.
Right. Yeah.
Who do we think is going to be more productive in the short term, and who do we think future is still holding a bigger place in the future? And then within that, who do we think will react better developmentally or just from a personal standpoint to being sent down? I don't think it's crazy to send down Alex Kirilloff.
No, I don't.
I think that would upset people, but Alex Kirilloff has not been that good for that long ever. And I'm still a believer, but at some point, he's a bad defensive corner guy and he needs to hit. And he just hasn't done that consistently enough, and nor has Larnach, but Larnach has done it more recently than Kirilloff, I guess. So I don't, by the way, I wouldn't send down Julian personally.
Right.
If they did send down Julian, I don't think it's the worst move ever.
I agree with you.
I just personally, that would be my least. I would eliminate that option first out of the 5. Of the other 4, I could make in my brain. I could make a case for doing all 4 of that. In my brain, there's a lot of weird stuff going on there, so don't go by that. But all I'm saying is, like, I would have no problem with any of the other 4.
I wouldn't even have a problem with Julian.
Well, right. I'm just saying I wouldn't do that. Like, here's Becky and I when we're trying to figure out dinner, which is really when you're 10 years in, that's the number one thing.
I want to hear this. Okay, keep going. Because this is what we do when we're trying to figure out where we're going for lunch.
Okay. Right. We both try to avoid making the decision. So she'll say something like, well, I'll pick 3 places and then you narrow it down from there.
Cool.
Like I'll give you 3 options. And then I'll say, okay, well, actually, you pick 3. I'll eliminate 1, and then you pick from the 2.
This is exactly what we do.
Stupid.
This is exactly what we do. No, honestly, I'll say, okay, here's 3 places. You get rid of the one you absolutely don't want to go to.
This is what we do.
Yep.
So this is how I would view
versa,
this.
right.
There's 5 options. Well, I don't want to eat Stanley's Bar and Grill for the 10th. That's one of her favorites. She loves it. It's a great place in the Northeast. There's only so many chicken fingers I can eat. You know what I mean? And she didn't want Yangtze for the 44th time in the last month.
That's right.
Julian, to me, if you said, here's 5 places, eliminate 1. Yeah, I'm going to keep Julian at second base. I think he's looked good defensively. I still view him as a huge part of their future. And I think he will bounce back from this in a meaningful way. But once you eliminate that, I have a hard time then going, well, you can't send down Kirilloff, or you can't send down Larnach, or you can't cut Margot, or you can't cut Farmer. I think there are compelling arguments to make, which is why this is one of the more interesting, why we spent so long talking about this. Right. It's one of the more interesting things, because usually in this case, one of 2 things is true. And sometimes they're the same thing. We either feel real strongly this guy hasn't done anything. Right. They got to send this guy down.
Right.
Or we just know what the Twins are going to do. And sometimes those overlap, obviously, where it's like, oh, when Lewis comes back, I expect so-and-so to be sent down. Whether they've said it outright or just you can read between the lines. This is one of the rare situations where not only am I not sure who it's going to be, it's not like it's one or the other. I legitimately would not be shocked by any of those 5 names.
Agree.
And maybe in a day or 2.
And I'd legitimately understand any of those 5 of them.
Right.
Yeah,
so that's what it'll be.
It's a tough decision.
We'll see if, some of the beats in Houston can get a little of the info to crack out.
Yeah. If things don't change, if we don't get an injury, we will all find out together on Sunday night. Before we get the rest of your notes, let's cover the last 2 of our sponsors. First sponsor is Storyworth. I gave Storyworth to my mom. Father's Day is coming up, and I would recommend you look into Storyworth, and here's why. I gave Storyworth to my mom. Got lots of good emails back from her, learned a lot about her family. And the reason she was very interested in Storyworth and doing that is because she had not been in great health. She had a stroke back in the early aughts. And, my dad was taking care of her to a large extent. She was interested in kind of passing along that information. I did not have that with my dad because, frankly, we thought my dad would be around a lot longer than my mom. And that did not work out. My dad ended up passing first. And, he was the only child. He grew up in southern Minnesota. I don't see that side of the family much anymore. And his parents are both passed. As a result, I lost a lot of what I know about my family history.
His story.
Yes.
And that's what Storyworth can do. They've been a sponsor for a while through a lot of Mother's Days and Father's Days and all that we've talked about. And the idea behind it is you get it for someone.
Right.
You send it to them. And part of it is they kind of send them like weekly email prompts.
Right. That's right.
With just different questions. What was the first job you ever had? What was your first day of school? What was it?
Who was your best friend growing up?
Stuff.
Right. Yeah,
and it's an icebreaker in a way to kind of get people remembering and telling little stories.
Right.
And some big stories too.
Right.
And then at the end of a year, you can collect all of those and you can literally get a book out of it, like a physical copy of a book. And then it's almost like an autobiography.
Right. That's right.
Like it's almost like the life story.
It's your memoir.
Right. Yeah. That you've kind of coaxed out of them through the whole Storyworth process.
Yeah, so you can give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift you'll all cherish for years, Storyworth. Right now you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/Gleeman. That's Storyworth, WORTH.com/Gleeman to save $10 on your first purchase.
And it's the perfect gift for people who are listening to this because it doesn't require physical delivery.
Yes.
So if you've completely blanked on getting a gift for Father's Day or whatever holiday,
you can do it immediately.
You can do it immediately.
You can do it Saturday night before Father's Day.
Our last sponsor today is the Game Time app, which John has used for numerous games this season.
That is correct.
Twins, Wolves, concerts, they can do all kinds of stuff. Their 2 specialties are hard to find tickets. If you're just like, man, I think this thing's sold out. Where am I going to get tickets? Or last minute tickets. And it can be as last minute as you're pre-gaming at some bar around Target Field and you go, we got 20 minutes to game time. Let's start heading over there. As you're heading over there, you pull up the Game Time app on your phone, you do the ticket search, you buy the tickets, and you can show as you're getting to gate, whatever at Target Field, you can walk right in with the
I
store.
went to the game yesterday with 2 college buddies, and they used the Game Time app to grab their tickets on the way to the game, right?
So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Gleeman, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code GLEEMAN, Gleeman, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I should note, when we were talking through options, I know we mentioned them briefly. There were probably people screaming at their whatever, saying, what about Carlos Santana?
Right.
I'm not saying Carlos Santana has been good. He's not been good.
Right.
He's had flashes where he gets hot, and he's trending better than he did in early April, certainly. And I think if you look at like the last month or so, he's been pretty decent production-wise, just overall.
He's been out of his slump longer than the other two, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But also, he just has a much bigger role. And so, like, when I'm saying with Farmer and Margot that you're not removing that big of a piece from the puzzle, you're removing a fairly big piece because he's essentially the everyday first baseman. Now, you can argue that that's actually more hurtful when he's not playing well because his role is bigger. And sure enough, he has the worst WPA, win probability added, on the entire team. And he's, 50 points below kind of the average first baseman in terms of OPS. He makes up for a little of that with defense, obviously. But, and so, if you're a fan and you say, I've seen enough from Carlos Santana,
and
at
especially
age 38.
especially considering the Jose Miranda. Like, if they thought Jose Miranda was going to do what he's doing, I'm not sure they would have brought in Carlos Santana in the first place.
Well, they're not going to play Jose Miranda every day at first base.
Well, that's what I mean.
But, and I don't think they are going to play Kirilloff every day at first base either. But yeah, that's a factor. I mean, Kirilloff can play first base. Miranda can play first base. I don't think you're going to lose a lot defensively, and I think they're particularly not enthused by either of those options at first base.
He made a hell of a play yesterday.
I mean, he's a good defender. Yeah. He's been as advertised defensively, and the Twins really liked him defensively when they signed him. He needs to hit more. He's also 38, so the future component is not there at all, obviously. Yeah. I just think I don't view them as that as a real possibility for them. And also, it's harder I don't know that I can make any sort of argument for dropping Santana that can't be made better for Margot. Yeah. Or maybe Farmer even. Yeah. Unless you just really want to free up everyday time at first base for Kirilloff or Miranda, but I don't think they really view that as likely. So that's why we didn't talk as much about Santana.
I'll tell you, if Kirilloff and Miranda and Larnach were all really hitting and it was August, I would suggest maybe we just turn over first base to a platoon of Kirilloff and or Miranda.
I mean, I don't know that the pitchers might revolt at that, but
especially if Duran's going to make a throw at first base like that yesterday.
Yeah, Rocco was funny yesterday. He was like, "They keep hitting it back to Duran, and
we're gonna have to work on that.
He's gonna have to make more of those plays." And the error, I don't know if they reversed it.
I don't know.
But I was ready to murder Stu Thornley, who's the official scorer.
E3 because it didn't bounce on the way there. Right?
That's insane.
Yeah, it didn't bounce on the way there.
Santana saved that ball from going down into the outfield.
Right.
Santana did nothing wrong on that play.
No.
You can very clearly say that Duran made a horrible throw.
Right.
That's one of those things where why have errors at that point? Like if everybody looked down to the scorer and was like, "What?" I try not to be that harsh on it. But that makes I'm sure there's some rule of scoring.
There is.
That tells you. That is one of the stupidest scoring decisions I've ever seen.
Shovels it to the wrong glove side of him down near his ankle over here. Right.
Here's the thing to me: to make an error, by definition, you would think you have to have done something wrong.
Right.
What did Carlos Santana do wrong on that play? By the way, if Carlos Santana would have been a worse fielder, and he wouldn't have stopped that ball from going into the outfield, and then the error would have been on Duran. So by being a better fielder,
probably right. Yeah, probably right.
By being more athletic and quicker and stopping that ball, he earned himself
by
an
touching
error.
it. Right.
What kind of sense does that make? Anyway, moving on to some other things. Just some quick hits on lineup stuff, other than these guys who might be dropped from the lineup. Good to see Ryan Jeffers snap out of a slump.
My goodness.
In a very
what
big
a day
way.
yesterday.
2 big homers. Correa had a great bases clearing triple.
Yeah.
And the hit itself changed the game, obviously.
Right.
But we've seen him come up with big hits. It was more the not settling for a double there that I think.
Right, yes.
He's got 2 triples now in the last not that many games.
Who was it? Was it the second baseman that was out there that double clutched on the throw to third base that allowed
he
Correa
slid,
to be
but he
safe?
didn't need to ultimately. But yeah, I thought it was going to be a close play.
I was wondering if he was checking to see if he had to play at home first or something. I don't know what was going on.
Correa said afterward what he has said since spring training, which is last year I was playing on 1 foot, and now I'm playing on 2 feet. And he hasn't turned into, Ricky Henderson or anything.
Sure.
But he's noticeably faster.
Yeah.
As a runner,
He's
as a
certainly
defender.
not going for a triple last year.
Oh, God. He might be
holding
holding up at first
of
last
course.
year. Or not getting that hit at all, if we're being honest. Like, it's not like he's been...
He's slowing down as he comes into second base, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
So that's been huge. The Vasquez, who finally dumps a single, and then for some reason the slowest guy on the team, although he does have some steals, gets hung up trying to steal and luckily it didn't come back to bite him in that game. I looked up this morning, so he has a 413 OPS this season. And just so people know, OPS is on base percentage plus slugging percentage.
Right.
Now a decent slugging percentage, one component of the two, is like 450. He has a 413 total on base plus slugging. The league average is 700.
Right.
So he's like 300 points below league average. Now, the league average for catchers is significantly lower, but it's still 600 and something. So he's 200 points below his position, basically. And I just started to think, I don't remember in recent Twins memory, there's been plenty of guys who get off to horrible starts. Sure. I mean, Margot's gotten off to bad. But they're 100 points better than, like, Margot and Farmer, for as bad as they've been, they got an OPS in the 500s, not the 400s. Then I started thinking, like, who's the last guy I remember who was playing regularly? Because Vasquez is starting 4 times a week, 5 times a week. So I looked. The last guy through this point in the season, the 56-game mark, who had a lower OPS with as much playing time as Vasquez is no one. It's never happened in the history of the Minnesota Twins. Yeah. Now, they've only been around for 60-something years, so that's a real small sample. No. The closest anybody has come, if you dial back the playing time a little bit, because he's got 120 plate appearances, basically.
He's got 116 plate appearances. Yeah.
You dial it back
which is like 11th on the team.
Right, but it's regular playing time.
Okay, right.
If you dial it back to like 100 plate appearances, Drew Butera is the only one who had a worse... He had a 399 one year, and Drew Butera is like famously bad as a hitter. Also a good defensive catcher.
Yes, right.
So I'm legitimately worried about him. We mentioned Brooks Lee moved his rehab from rookie ball to low A. They are across the street from each other, so that's not really much of a move, but it's a higher level of competition. Yeah. I would expect him, barring a setback, to be with the Saints at some point in this upcoming next week.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints return from Rochester.
Yeah.
They play at Rochester through Sunday, have Monday off, and they'll be back
right
here Tuesday,
around the time Royce Lewis leaves.
Yeah.
Brooks Lee can
I think that
take over.
Probably the plan.
Shortstop, not third base. But and then from there, the when will they call it Brooks Lee watch can start, which is always fun. Yep. And then lastly, on the lineup front, the Deshaun Kersey fan club, of which I consider myself a member, can calm down for a bit because he's got a strained calf and is on the IL.
So they could use a left-handed hitting corner outfielder in St. Paul, huh?
Yeah, that's the need. Toby Gardner-Harris has a real lineup need, so we're going to send Larnach down there. It is funny whenever people are like, because there are people, less so now that they're linked to the Twins, but who are like Saints fans.
Sure. Right.
And they're like, I'm sure you have season tickets to the Saints. You're like, oh, Gardenhire, why does he bat this guy second or whatever?
Right.
I need people to know Toby does a good job over there, and he's real well respected, and players who come up speak really well of him. And, if he wants to be a major league, bench coach or third base coach, and there's opportunity for him to do that in the next few years. But he's not deciding anything. Like, if they want a guy playing left field, they tell him this guy's playing left field. If they want a guy batting second. We want
Royce Lewis to play 4 times. We want him to play third base sometime in the next week, and then another one. We played back-to-back games on these days. Right.
Okay, so pitching. Do a little pitching talk to end it here. We talked a lot with Doe on the Patreon podcast about Duran's velocity dip, and then it very briefly went to 103 and 102. The last two pitches he threw
Tuesday night.
Second game of the series.
That was the second game of the series.
And then, in a surprise to me, that was his fourth appearance in 5 days.
Yes.
Then he took Wednesday off.
Yep.
Because they lost. And then he came back and closed it out.
We were wondering whether or not he'd have 2 games off after pitching 4 times in 5 days.
I was surprised.
You were surprised
with this road trip coming up. I thought, you want to kind of send him to Houston fresh, but they had a save situation, obviously. Yep. They wanted to. They used Griffin Jacks also when they could have used like Alcala, Stallman, Okert to close it out.
When did they score runs 5, 6, and 7? What inning was that?
Before the 9th. It was
I was just wondering at what point did they go from Alcala to Jacks to...
Right, they had scored at that point. Okay. But when they put Jacks in, they were winning, I think.
And I think even when Alcala came in.
Maybe. So I was a little surprised. On the other hand, it was a safe situation. They turned that into a mess, obviously, in part because he didn't make a play on a ball hit back to him. There was just some weirdness overall in that inning, but he escaped from it, which has been common with him. But his velocity was back to 100 instead of 103. But we're not going to get into that too much because we talked a lot about it with Doe.
Just sign up for the Patreon. You don't have to pay for the back episodes, so you can absolutely just listen.
You get the whole archive for free.
You won't get charged for your first $1 until we release one on Monday where we're talking about the Astros.
And Doe had some good thoughts on it, I think, because he had talked to Duran the day before. But the quick version is they feel it's mechanical, not health-based. They feel they've identified it. The fact that he did throw 103, which was his hardest pitch of the season on Tuesday, suggests that at least for a few pitches, they did correct it. He was able to get back to the peak velocity. But then the fact that now part of it is they've just been working him very hard. And so you're going to get lesser velocity no matter what in those situations. But that's definitely something to watch because the save situations, he's converted them.
Yes.
But they're getting a little trickier. There's been a lot fewer swings and misses, a lot fewer strikeouts, and so they've been a little bit more...
I mean, all of them were tense this series.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, some of that was defensive issues and stuff.
That's true.
But also on the bullpen front, they called up Diego Castillo from AAA.
We saw him.
Who pitched 2 scoreless in his first appearance. Looked pretty good. He's had done a lot of good stuff with Tampa Bay, actually going back to Baldelli's last year in Tampa Bay. So he knows Diego Castillo.
Right.
He was, I would say, a quality setup man for 3 or 4 years with Tampa Bay and then for a little bit with Seattle. Had a rough last season, has had a few injury situations, got cut loose. They signed him to a minor league deal, I think like right before the season started,
I think that's right.
And sent him to AAA. And he initially was walking some guys at AAA, and then he stopped walking guys, which has been a kind of career-long issue. He's always been a mid-90s fastball, or sinker, I guess it is, with a real sharp slider. So he can miss bats. He's got a 3.20-something ERA in like 300 career innings in the majors, 10-plus strikeouts per 9 inning. Like when he's been healthy, he's been an effective setup man for some pretty good teams. Like I said, Tampa Bay and Seattle, 5 or 6 years in the majors. His issue has been staying healthy fully and then throwing strikes. When it goes bad for him, he's walking too many guys. He talked the other day when they called him up about how we were like, man, you haven't walked anybody in the last 15 innings at AAA. What happened? Right. And he said the coaches there worked with him on like visualization of pitches and sort of more mindset based than mechanical based. And he said that really, we'll see if that sticks, but that really has done wonders for me in terms of, trusting my stuff, pounding the strike zone, trusting that the mid-90s sinker and the good slider is enough. And, I'm not saying you should count on him being this year's Brock Stewart or anything.
Right.
But I think from a stuff standpoint and a track record standpoint and just looking at him, I mean, he's built like a left tackle. Yeah. He throws real hard. He's got a good breaking ball. He's got a real track record of 4 or 5 years of success in a relatively high leverage role. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he were to be a pretty effective guy for the next, 3 months or something. It also wouldn't shock me if he was time here was short.
But he wasn't putting up like video game numbers in St. Paul, but they were really solid numbers. He was kind of
late they were very good.
Yeah, I mean, he had 23 strikeouts, 18 innings, 5 walks, something like that, 6 walks, something like that, and was serving as the closer at times down there, getting some saves. So he's
in tandem with calling up Alcala. That does change the kind of face, especially while Brock Stewart is out, of the kind of middle innings of the 6th, 7th inning, and Alcala, I've talked too much about Alcala this season, but my kind of view of Alcala is I'm confused by, going back years, but this year especially, why they don't just treat him as a normal one-inning reliever. Why it's 40 pitches, 50 pitches, and he gets sent back to AAA. First of all, I don't think that role suits him. But even worse than that, I think given his injury track record, he's the last guy you'd want to be kind of pushing the envelope from a workloads perspective with.
Yeah.
And so yesterday, he comes into a relatively big spot, and he pitches a 1-2-3 seventh inning, strikes out 2, looks great, hits 100 miles an hour with his fastball.
Throws, 14 pitches?
13, 14 pitches. A couple of 13, 14 for a common man.
There you go.
And I was encouraged by the fact that he did not come back out to pitch the eighth.
Well, that's what we were wondering that ourselves, in part because we were wondering whether or not Duran would be around. Would they want to pitch Duran in the ninth? It seemed logical to me that they would throw Alcala in the 7th and 8th and give Jax the 9th.
That's how I thought it was going to go.
Right. Yeah.
Instead, he pitches 3 batters, strikes out 2 of them. You couldn't have had a better inning than that, and then doesn't come back out. And so afterward, Baldelli was asked about Alcala, and he said, that was a pleasure to watch. And he said, basically compared to where he was earlier in the season, it's great to see he really seems to be kind of on top of the ball. The stuff is playing up. The velocity is up. The slider is even harder than it was before, but also the fastball. And so I wondered from that, that is as effusive in praise of Alcala as Baldelli tends to be. And then just using him like he did as a one-inning guy. I wonder if they finally come to the realization that I had hoped, and I think both of us had kind of hoped with him, of what if you just give him a run as the 7th inning guy for a while? Right. Why does he have to be the guy who throws 40 pitches or mops up or does long relief? Somebody in the bullpen has to be, but why him? His stuff is too good. His track record is too good. And also he's had too many injuries to be the guy to stretch out. So it's only one appearance and one post-game series of quotes and all that, but it did make me think maybe now there's an opportunity for him to pitch medium leverage 1 inning at a time and kind of let it fly here and, upper 90s fastball with a good slider. I think Castillo, same opportunity. I think even Stallmont, there's some opportunity if he can kind of maintain the velocity we've seen in the last couple outings. Those are 3 right-handed relievers that they could really use one at least stepping up while Brock Stewart is out to help bridge the gap from the starters to Jax and Duran because, Thielbar and Opgert from the left side, matchup-wise, there are going to be situations where it's just, it's Bobby Witt and it's Salvador Perez, and you don't want to bring in a lefty to face those guys. You need to get outs from somebody from the right side. Obviously, Jay Jackson didn't get the job done. They DFA'd him. They sent down Funderburk, who was the 3rd lefty. I think he's done an okay job, but having 3 lefties just wasn't really...
Well, especially versus the Royals.
Right.
They just don't have that many lefties.
In general, they were using him in spots that you're just better off having a righty in.
Yeah, that's right.
Or having a true long reliever in, I guess. But
Well, Castillo, like you said, Castillo can fill that role, right? That does sort of free up Alcala to potentially be a high leverage arm. I thought it was interesting that they brought him in the 7th when the first batter was a lefty. Yeah. Right, because before there was, we're wondering how they're using Alcala, and before there's Alcala's hurt, there was Alcala the reliever. He's really good against righties. He's not been very good against lefties. He needs to get his changeup figured out. Right. And so sure enough, they bring him in versus the lefty, and the first 2 pitches he throws are changeups on the outside edge of the plate and gets a couple of swinging strikes.
But he had made progress with that before all the injuries, going back 2 years or 3 years.
A little bit of progress,
but also they couldn't have brought in a lefty and still used him because if you bring in a lefty, he's got to face 3 batters there. So
here's the thing. Thielbar would finish the last inning.
But they don't like to use Thielbar and have him come back for a second inning. Even if he throws 1 pitch in the first inning.
That's right.
Because he's 100 years old.
And then he...
Sorry, Caleb. You are 100 years old in baseball.
And then he dominated the righties with his slider.
Yes. He looked great.
His fastball, right.
He's got a first career, Alcala. Has a low 3 ERA with a more than a strikeout per 9 innings and a decent walk rate. And you watch him, he throws 98 with a good slider. It doesn't have to be that complicated. Right. I think even Castillo, for that matter. So that'll be something to watch. Kind of who they're hoping one of those guys emerges, not at the Brock Stewart level from last year, but can just be a reliable
7th
medium leverage. Right. Right-handed reliever would really have a big effect on them. And then I wonder, now that you have Castillo and you have Alcala and you sort of, have Stallmont maybe, if they might start to re-stretch out Sands to be more of a multi-inning guy, which is the role we saw him fill prior to this year. This year, his effectiveness was up early, and also they just needed somebody to get these 7th innings. Now there's less of a need maybe for that and more of a need, particularly with him struggling a little bit of late, to be more of a long reliever. So that's something to watch coming up here in terms of bullpen usage. Another thing we talked a lot with Doe about, so we won't get into it a ton here. Again, go listen to the Patreon. You'll like it.
You will.
If you're still listening an hour and whatever into the show, you'll like the Patreon.
No problem.
And also, Doe was a great guest. And I don't like to compliment anyone.
No, you don't.
He's a great guest. We talked a lot about Joe Ryan with him, and also just the idea of types of fastballs and increasing fastball velocity as a bigger picture, which Doe had a lot of good thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Joe Ryan, when the Twins got him in 2021, which is now a brilliant trade, 2 months of a 41-year-old Nelson Cruz for Joe Ryan's entire career.
In an uncompetitive year. Right?
Yeah. Through 91 miles an hour.
Right.
And the reason they were able to get him, even though he had led the minors in strikeouts the year before, was because even the Tampa Bay Rays, who are probably one of the smartest organizations, especially when it comes to pitching in baseball, were skeptical. Because he was an all-fastball starting pitcher who threw 91 miles an hour.
Right.
Well, when do you hear of that? How is that a thing?
Right.
But because he had a unique delivery and because he had an ability to work up in the zone with kind of weird movement characteristics at the time, his fastball played up much more than the velocity. He blew high fastballs past good hitters who would look out at the mound like, what just happened to me?
Yes.
Who's this guy who just threw 91 past me like it was 100?
Right.
And then he had immediate success with the Twins because he threw strikes. He was a good pitcher right away. The next year he's throwing 92. Then the year after that he's throwing 93, 93 and a half. Early on this year, he's like 93, 94, and you're like, wow, this is a completely different thing.
Yes.
The other day, 96.6, the fastest pitch he's ever thrown, and he threw multiple pitches against the Royals that were 95 or 96 plus. And you look at his velocity overall for the year, it's like near 94 average with the fastball, which is legitimately up 3 miles an hour compared to 3 years ago. And the command of it and the strike throwing ability hasn't changed at all. And I also think it's opened up his off-speed pitches, which he used to not throw at all. Now he throws fewer fastballs than ever, even though he's throwing it harder than ever. But the sweeper and the splitter, which is basically his changeup, can be more effective because they're sort of paired with a higher velocity fastball. He's also throwing them harder too. And so it's even if the quality of, let's say, your changeup isn't any better than it used to be, if your fastball is 3 miles an hour harder,
they have less chance to adjust.
Right. There's just less adaptability from the hitter's standpoint. So that's been a huge thing. I mean, he needs to maintain that start to start, which has been an issue for him all his career, velocity-wise. Sometimes he's throwing hard, sometimes he's not. But then also, this is the third year in a row where his first 10, 12 starts have been really good. And he's yet to put it together for a full season. Because if he pitches like this for a full season, he's going to be an all-star and he's going to get Cy Young votes.
Yeah, right.
But he didn't do that last season. And really 2 seasons ago, he didn't collapse or anything 2 seasons ago. But so with Pablo Lopez struggling, which we talked about on 2 episodes ago a lot, check the archive. Joe Ryan stepping up to be so good has been huge for the rotation. And then also, obviously, Simeon Woods Richardson stepping up has also been pretty big for the rotation, too.
I mean, we said at the beginning of the year, one of the storylines outside of the regular season and what it's going to provide is who's going to fill Sonny Gray's role, during the regular season.
Sure.
But you can cover that with a variety of guys, right? But more specifically, if they make it to the postseason, who's going to give us confidence they have a chance games too, right? Yeah. And what we were hoping is that either Ryan or Ober or potentially Paddock would end up sliding into that role. Yeah. I mean, Ryan is absolutely looking like he's on path.
Got a long way to go because he looked like this last year too.
Right.
And then by the time he got to the playoffs, he was such a mess that they avoided even using him in the playoffs.
Correct. You are correct.
But he looks great. Ober, if they don't have to face the Royals in the playoffs, he looks good.
Yeah, that's right.
For his career, Bailey Ober has like a 3.25 ERA against everyone but the Royals and a 7-something ERA against the Royals. Right. It's been particularly bad, obviously, this season. The 2 starts, the one to open the year in Kansas City, and then the one this series was really bad. he's had some other bad outings, especially in Kansas City over the last couple of years. He really just seemed like after the early season one, they thought the Royals kind of had a tell on him of some kind. This time, he was asked about that, and he was like, well, they just seem to be so on my fastball. And I even threw it less than I usually do. Or I went to my cutter instead of the
Right.
But anytime I could go 10 straight pitches not throwing it, and if I threw a fastball on the 11th pitch, they hit it hard. And so whether that's a tell or whether that's just game planning or whether he's just not –
He's just grooving the fastball.
whatever.
Right,
Some
yeah,
of those
right.
pitches that they hit were grooved. I mean, they were middle pitches. On the other hand, he gave up an extra base hit to Salvador Perez that wasn't even a strike. So,
That's right, yeah.
so Lopez and Ober, and to some extent, Paddock hasn't been that sharp the last few outings. Are not.
Although he went real deep the one just before this. But
Sure.
yes, he got yesterday I felt like he got really lucky to get out of the 5.2 innings he went with 4 only hits because they were stinging the ball a lot.
He's another guy, and you would maybe more expect this from a guy coming back from his second Tommy John surgery, but the velocity has been real inconsistent start to start. He's had some where he's 93 to 95. He's had some where he's low 90s. His fastball's been great. His changeup hasn't been good at all, which used to be his go-to.
Right, yes.
So he's got some work to do. And then I was surprised he came out to get the 1 out in the 6th yesterday.
He got 2 outs in the 6th.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was already at, 80 pitches or something like that. But they have pretty consistently with him let him either eat innings, start innings, or just push through to go 7 or 8. He went 8 against Cleveland a couple starts ago.
Right.
And
even when he's eating it, they've let him do that.
right,
actually,
he had some bad starts against
Baltimore
where they let him eat it.
Yeah.
And I'm not
He had a 12 ERA or something after that.
for a
damn start,
normal
right?
starter. That's just the course of business. Sometimes the bullpen's out of gas and you need to eat some innings.
Right.
But the last guy I would think they want kind of trying to get an extra 2 outs or continuing on when he's struggling is a guy coming back from a second Tommy John. It tells me they're not that worried about his immediate workload, but I also wonder if that means they have plans to give him a break at some
Maybe.
point.
I mean, he's also – listen, not that this necessarily plays a factor, but he's absolutely – he's going to be pushing for that. Like that's his
but also – it shouldn't be that hard to say to a guy, look,
yeah.
you've essentially never been healthy in your life. We're trying to keep you healthy. I don't know that you need to get 2 extra outs against the Royals on May 30th or whatever it is.
I do love how the Target Field plays the Western music when he strikes somebody out.
It's no joke. When we're in the clubhouse pregame, he'll come strolling in with the biggest hat you've ever seen,
the biggest cowboy hat,
the biggest belt buckle you've ever seen.
Exactly.
He doesn't have spurs on his boots, but he might as well. He's got the boots. Yeah, it's really. I say he looks like Raylan Givens. It's a hell of a, if I could pull off that look.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
But me, it'd be 10 pounds of S in a 5-pound bag. You know what I mean? So one time I was when I was a kid, I was like 15 or something. I was at a pool party at somebody's house, and we were just sitting there. Yeah. And we were like, having a burger or whatever and watching people in the pool. And the guy whose house it was one of my friend's dads. He looked at me and there was some fat kid going off the diving board. I, by the way, was halfway to becoming a fat kid. And he turned to me and he goes, if that ain't 10 pounds of ass in a 5-pound bag, I don't know what. And that stuck. I love that saying. Anyway, to hear that uncensored, go to patreon.com.
Also ad free over at Patreon.
Yeah. The other thing on the starting pitching front, and we can probably finish up here. We talked about Simeon Woods Richardson, who has certainly done enough to keep chugging along here in the rotation. But also David Festa at AAA has really looked very good over the last half dozen starts or so. Early in the season, had some issues throwing strikes. That's still his biggest weakness is kind of controlling what is real high octane raw stuff. But if he can trim the walks to, just below average instead of bad, the rest of his game can be excellent. I mean, he is 95 to 97 with a fastball. He has an excellent slider that's probably now his best pitch that he can throw against righties and lefties. And he has a pretty solid changeup that used to be his best pitch. So he started to put up some huge strikeout numbers at AAA, striking out 10 in 5 innings a couple of times, all that. His last start, I think he struck out 7 guys in a row. So the concept of their rotation depth is so different than it was in the middle of spring training. In the middle of spring training, it was like, well, hopefully they can get a couple of months out of DeSclafani so that they can delay Varlin. Right. And who knows what they have in terms of prospects. Well, DeSclafani never throws a pitch for him. Varlin steps right in the rotation and gets his brains beat in, goes 0-4 with a 9 ERA. They send him back to the minors, and they call up Simeon Woods Richardson, who has pitched really well, given the circumstances. And now, kind of like I was talking about with, it's easier to cut loose a Margot or a Farmer on June 1st because you're hoping that some of your minor leaguers have put themselves in position that you now trust them. Well, now Festa's ready, or a lot closer to ready than he was coming into the season. You still have Varlin, who's been kind of a mixed bag because he's working on some stuff at AAA. You got Zebby Matthews at AA. There's a lot more potential rotation depth than there was 2 months ago. Yeah. Not that Simeon Woods Richardson needs to be pressured or anything like that, but there's at least now some other guys behind him on the depth chart that you would feel good about, not just now, but long term. I do think
you talked a little bit about his wildness, which has been a problem in the past. Yeah. Over the last 7 games, 30.2 innings. 11 walks, which is basically average for about right. It's
doable. It's workable.
Oh, it's absolutely average. But 50 strikeouts in those 30.2 innings. Like those are close to video game numbers.
He's not fooling people. Right. He's just throwing stuff past people and then throwing this nasty slider at them, especially against righties. Yeah. It's coming into the season, I picked him as he to me was the Twins' best pitching prospect. I know some people like Marco Raya or Charlie Soto or whatever. I mean, they have some good ones, but I like guys who are up the ladder. Right. And he had ended last year at AAA. He had been okay. He had been really good at AA for a stretch. And also just, watching him in spring training, even throwing bullpens, they got a lot of guys who have good stuff. Right. But there's certain guys, you watch them throw 20 pitches and you go, oh, yeah, okay. Right. Yeah. That guy could really be something. And I think he has a chance to be a playoff caliber starter. And I do think if he's not now, he will be ready in the second half to at least be an option for them if they need it. It'd be great if they didn't need it, but if they shut down Paddock at some point, if Simeon Woods Richardson turn back into a pumpkin, or if somebody gets hurt or whatever, I think Festa could really turn some heads right away. And similar to Varlin last year, if they don't need him in the rotation in September and October, if you unleash him for an inning at a time, my goodness, he could be 100 with a great slider and maybe control issues under a little bit. The one thing I wanted,
the Saints will be in town next week, by the way, while the Twins are on the road, and you won't be able to watch them on Comcast. So take a look and see when Festa be. I think he'll be starting one of the games this weekend, like Friday, maybe even tonight over in Rochester. So middle of next week, late next week, go check out the Saints.
The one thing I wanted to say about Woods Richardson, who's got like a 2-something ERA and 10 starts or something like that. He's saved their ass in a huge way.
Yep.
But we talked a couple episodes ago about pump the brakes a little bit, not to take away from what he's done, but forward looking. We're about 10 years past the point where it used to be. There's old man Gleeman now. Back in my day, 20 years ago, when we both started blogging, if a 23-year-old comes up to the majors as a rookie and makes 10 starts with a 2.75 ERA, you go, this guy's gonna be a star. Right? He's got 2-something ERA now as a rookie. Imagine how good he'll be 5 years.
Alan Anderson's going to be amazing for years.
Here are the names that I wrote down that I was thinking about: Joe Mays, Scott Diamond, Nick Blackburn, etc. Now you may notice there's a player type there, which is low strikeout. Relatively speaking, low strikeouts. He's not as bad as those guys, but you got to keep in mind Woods Richardson is averaging 6.5 strikeouts per 9 innings. Well, that beats the hell out of all those guys. Except you have to keep in mind that the strikeout rate is double what it used to be. Striking out 6.5 per 9 in 2024 is probably equivalent to striking out 4 per 9 in 2002 or something like that. Back when Joe Mays was doing it. So that's the only thing that gives me pause with Woods Richardson, particularly when you look at the raw stuff, which has ticked up and allowed him to have this success. But I don't know that you would look at him pitch and go, this is going to be a big strikeout guy. Sure. And there are ways to win without strikeouts. Do not get me wrong. But you got to get a lot of ground balls and you got to throw a lot of strikes. And he's capable of doing both of those things. But that's the only reason I would just caution against viewing him based on this sample we've seen so far as like a can't miss, lock him into the rotation, that'd be great. And I think he's capable of that. But it's still why a lot of people still view him as like a 4th or 5th starter as opposed to a future, kind of linchpin of the rotation, just because he just hasn't missed that many bats and hasn't come back to bite him that much yet. But there are going to be some starts where he can't stop the balls in play enough.
Right.
And they're going to start to pile up and maybe some bad luck or some bad fielding or whatever. You're going to need to get more than 6 strikeouts per 9 innings in the year 2024 in the current environment of baseball to be a successful starter long term, unless you are just absolute top of the food chain at throwing strikes and getting ground balls, which I don't think he will be.
I will.
But what he's done so far is real
I haven't
impressive.
taken a look at the splits he has going first time through the lineup or starts the second time in the lineup. I will, and
he basically hasn't been allowed to face third time.
Well, that's probably
for
true.
the most part.
You're right. And my memory could be escaping. It seems to me like he has a lot of success missing bats.
Yes.
First time through the lineup.
And then
it's not uncommon. He will be in the 3rd inning with 5 strikeouts.
Right.
And then he will finish 5 innings with 6 strikeouts.
It's definitely happened
or
a couple, 2 or 3 times like that.
That's right. It feels to me like that sort of, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's a good side. I don't know if it's a bad side. I don't know if it, but it feels to me like, it's just, I mean, the results speak for themselves. So, I do feel fairly confident with him on the mound right now, despite some of those.
Here's the thing. Like, first of all, I'm not denigrating what he's done. He's been excellent.
Right.
And I think he has a future in the rotation. But we've read the same story, you and I, over the last 20 years, a half dozen times with the names I mentioned and a few more. Which is when Joe Mays is rocking and rolling, and he's got a 3.25 ERA. I think he damn near won an ERA title one year with a strikeout rate under 5.
Right.
No one wants to hear the turd in the punch bowl say it's not sustainable. Yeah. Same thing with Scott Diamond. When Scott Diamond was rolling, and I was sitting there going, I don't know, he's not really striking anybody out. And same thing with Nick Black. The feedback to that was, hey, a-hole, shut up. He's great.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm sure the last 5 minutes, some people were like, why is he talking badly about Simeon Woods Richardson? I'm not. But the reality is, if you're trying to project based on performance, that is a massive indicator of kind of staying power or upside or however you want to phrase it. And this ain't our first rodeo. This is like our 50th rodeo. And I've had enough arguments about low strikeout starting pitchers who are in the moment thriving to know that the reaction is not going to be good. And then if and when they do fall apart, and every guy I mentioned eventually pretty quickly fell apart, no one is going to be learning a big lesson from that so that the next time a guy comes around and has huge success with a low strikeout rate, no one really learns from that. It just sort of repeats itself. So all I'm saying is, this has happened before.
I think the second column I ever wrote at twinsgeek.com back in 2002 was criticizing the Twins for giving Joe Mays a contract extension in February of
and
2002.
I will guarantee, if you were to find that article, strikeout rate will be a big part of it.
Yeah. Oh, that was the whole point.
And I will almost guarantee that if there were comments on it, the reaction was, you're an idiot. What does strikeouts matter? His ERA is great. He throws strikes. He does all this stuff. Because when you're at the good end of the spectrum,
that's right,
you look great. It's just what happens when some of the contact finds holes or goes for homers. But anyway, believe me, I know this is coming across as criticism. Simeon Woods Richardson is at the 100th percentile versus expectations at this point. Yeah. He has truly saved their ass, and he deserves credit for that. I'm just saying, you can't strike out 6 guys per 9 innings in 2024 and be expected to be a long-term impact starting pitcher. But I'm also not saying he's incapable of upping that. I do think he's capable of upping.
I just took a look. First time through the order he strikes out twice as many guys as he does second. Yeah. I don't know how common that is amongst pitchers. But.
Okay. We'll shut up. We'll be back, like John said, Monday morning. Possibly Sunday night even.
No, we're definitely doing it Sunday night. Yeah, for sure.
With a recap of the 3-game series in Houston.
That's right.
And then we will be back midweek.
Midweek with probably a mailbag.
Yeah, or we're talking Yankees maybe a little bit.
A little bit.
Well, it depends.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I will have been at the Yankees game that night at Tuesday night. Yeah. And then next week there will not be a free episode. I'm going to be in London, and I'm not going to be doing a free episode.
By the way, Mark Rosen was at the game 2 days ago, and he came in and he said, hi, and he sat down to eat lunch with us. And the first thing he said was, has Bonus ever spent 2 nights in a row in Minnesota? And I said, well, that's my bit that I do. And then he said, he's going to New York to fly to, and I was like, yeah. Because you said it was cheaper to go through New York.
Oh, yeah. It was $2,400 from here to go to London.
Yeah.
Versus $600 from JFK.
Right.
In New York.
And it just so happens the Twins are going to be in New York.
And Twins are going to be facing the Yankees
and it just so
the night
happens
before
you can, go to a bar with Dan Hayes on that night. And, yeah.
That's the way it's going to work
amazing.
out,
I was like, Mark, it's all true. It's an amazing brain and lifestyle. And part of me was like, aren't you going to go like sit next to A-Rod at the Wolves game now? Like, aren't you kind of in the same boat or whatever? But I didn't say that because Mark Rose in that. But by the way, if you go sign up for the Patreon,
that's right.
You can go listen to a 90-minute interview, I guess, we did with Mark Rosen last year or the year before, where he told all kinds of fun stories from like the 87 and 91 World Series runs and all that.
So if you're on the Patreon, we'll be talking to you again Monday. If you're not, it'll be 2 weeks before we get back to you.
If you're not, we still love you.
Yes, right.
But we'd love to love you, baby. Before that.
But I also love to be in London. So
John can't. John, you know, like the movie Speed, if the bus gets below 50 miles an hour, everyone dies. If John has to be in the greater Minnesota area for more than 72 consecutive hours, I don't know what happens, but it's not good.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Gleeman.